The fifth test is whether a hypothesis is in accord with accepted beliefs. For example, well, I'll skip the example from the jury here for the sake of time. But a sixth test is whether a hypothesis far outstrips any of its rival theories in meeting these previous tests. Okay, for example, it could be that several rival hypotheses meet different tests to different degrees. But if one hypothesis stands head and shoulders above the others, that's an additional reason for thinking it's the best explanation. Now, allow me to briefly note how the resurrection hypothesis, that God raised Jesus from the dead, meets these tests. First, the resurrection hypothesis has great explanatory scope because it explains why the tomb was found empty, why the disciples saw post-mortem appearances of Jesus, and why the disciples believed that God had raised Jesus from the dead. Second, the resurrection hypothesis has great explanatory power because it explains why the body of Jesus was gone. It also explains why people repeatedly saw Jesus alive despite his earlier public execution. Third, the resurrection hypothesis is plausible. I think there is nothing that we know that disproves the hypothesis. Fourth, the resurrection hypothesis is not contrived because it only requires one additional assumption, that God exists. But this would not be a serious problem for someone who is open to the idea that there is a God. Fifth, the resurrection hypothesis is in accord with accepted beliefs. Of course, it is an accepted belief that people do not rise naturally from the dead, but the resurrection hypothesis does not deny that. For the resurrection hypothesis is that God raised Jesus from the dead supernaturally. Finally, the resurrection hypothesis far outstrips any of its rival theories in meeting these previous tests. Down through history, various rival explanations of the facts have been offered, but these rivals have been almost universally rejected by contemporary scholarship. While I don't have the time in my opening statement to explain why, let me just point out to you that some of the rival theories, like the hallucination theory, have trouble explaining one or more of the facts. Like, the hallucination theory doesn't explain why the tomb would have been empty. Okay? It explains the appearances, but it doesn't explain some of the other facts that I mentioned. The wrong tomb theory, the conspiracy theory, and the apparent death theory. Mainly, the apparent death theory is that Jesus didn't actually die, but he was able to revive in the tomb and appear to his disciples and convince them that he really had conquered death. I think there are serious problems with each of these, but you can ask me about them in the Q&A period if you want. So then, my main argument tonight was having two steps, and I borrowed this, indeed almost cut and pasted it, from the work of philosopher William Lane Craig. First, 4 facts need to be explained for any adequate historical hypothesis about the resurrection, and the best explanation of these facts is that God raised Jesus from the dead. Thanks.